crazy, wacky ideas and things I probably can't say on a podcast, but that was the joy of being there is because it was such a long runway.
Sports business moves pretty fast, right? And people change jobs, start new companies, win championships, all kinds of stuff. That's why it makes sense every so often to check in with a previous guest just to find out what's going on. And this time, we're checking in to see what's up with Megan Sheffield from episode 32.
That's kind of Megan Sheffield right now. She's doing interesting things.
Yeah, trying. As I'm turning off Teams, by the way, and he heard that little bling.
Yeah, nobody wants Teams
There's
around.
interesting things happening all the time.
All the time and everywhere.
Walking in, watching the neighbors outside. Yeah. There's all sorts of interesting things going on.
Well, there are, but I want to talk about something specifically, right? Because when we first talked, now this goes all the way back to episode 32.
Wow.
I know.
That's an honor. I like that number.
It's a very good number. I feel like that was at where I don't want to say I peaked at 32, but it was somewhere in that neighborhood.
No,
Like when we talked, you were at Zappos.
I was.
And you were you hadn't been there a long time. It was still relatively
really new.
Right. And I remember you talked about you got the job and you said, if we don't partner with the Savannah Bananas, this is all for naught, basically. Yeah. So you create this great partnership, and it seemed like a great fit for the brand.
Yeah.
You've changed gears.
I have.
Where are you now?
I'm at LinkedIn.
So, all right. So what happened? What was the trajectory that took you from wild and wacky Zappos to what I can guess is a sort of a more straight-laced brand in LinkedIn?
Straight-laced, but the position and the point of view they have, I thought was really interesting.
Okay.
So, look, I'll back up. So, yes, Zappos was so much fun.
Right.
Culture was great. People were great. Got to do some really silly things and have conversations about things I would never get to do at any other company. And that was the lovely, weird part about being there in my experience. And I'm really, really happy I got to see a little bit of what Tony had created.
Okay, yeah.
It really did change my trajectory of what corporate culture should be and what leadership should be, what true, strong relationship-led leadership looks like, and what happens when you put culture first, what the result of that is.
You really got a different look on how a company can run from leadership capacity. What was your biggest takeaway from that? Like, when you think about who you were when you entered that community, even calling it a community, I suppose, is kind of interesting, right? When you arrived there versus now, what are you bringing to LinkedIn that you didn't have previously, do you think?
I think there's an underlying sense of joy in everything that happened at Zappos. And so I try and find that in everything that I'm doing at LinkedIn.
So how long have you been at LinkedIn now?
It's been only 3 months.
Okay, so this still has that new LinkedIn smell on it.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, they reached out to me starting in about May, and to be honest, I was at Zappos. I'm doing all this. We're talking about custom Savannah Bananas Crocs and crazy, wacky ideas and things I probably can't say on a podcast, but that was the joy of being there is because it was such a long runway.
Yeah.
And it fit my personality really well too. And I was a big fish.
Yeah.
A lot of, it's my own ego speaking, but
sure.
That was a good spot. I liked that.
You can have a big ego if you've earned the big ego. It's not like you're allowed to go out on that limb a little bit.
It was a pretty little pond, but so yeah, they reached out and I'm always of the mindset of we'll always have a conversation.
Sure.
Right? And
talk about anything to anyone about anything.
Yeah, let's talk. Yeah. Happy to have the conversation. And every conversation just kind of got better and better the more I talked with them. They see partnerships in a really different light. It's a new space at LinkedIn. And so that got me really excited because I could kind of come in and build it from square one. They're really excited about sports, but they weren't really sure where to start, which, is like I was getting all fired up and excited about. So I think that's the part that really resonated. And then after meeting the leadership, and again, it really came down to culture too. I was like, all these people are awesome. And as I looked at my own growth and kind of where I wanted to go next, just felt like the right career move for me.
So this really felt like a sort of a ball of clay to you, right? It's not like anybody's been sitting in a stadium and go look at the outfield sign and say, "Well, there's LinkedIn." I mean, this is ground up. What do you feel like you understand? Because you've been doing partnerships for a while. This is in your DNA.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you think is going to be the aha moment for them as you start building out strategy on the things that, based on your experiences with a lot of different technology brands, right? We're talking Microsoft, we're talking Amazon, we're talking Zappos. These are all blue chip internet e-commerce brands. So what are they ready for, and what do you think you're going to have to help them build?
Well, I think the interesting part of my kind of exploration of what partnership should be at LinkedIn, particularly in the sports space, is that I really was thinking about, most of the folks in the sports industry, the first thing they do when something amazing happens in their business is come to LinkedIn.
That's
Shout
true.
about it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So,
Guilty.
yeah, which is not a bad thing, but it's a great thing. And I
Yeah.
thought, what an interesting perspective to have. We're already a part of the conversation,
Yeah, almost organically.
right? And so I thought that in itself is a really interesting perspective to just sit in and think on for a while,
Yeah.
right? They're already gonna come and share these milestones or share these big sales wins or big partnership announcements. They aren't gonna happen on our platform.
That's interesting.
So how do we take that perspective as we think about the ways in which we're spending money in the sports, particularly in women's sports, is what we're focused on. And so I started thinking a lot about not so much the traditional sponsorship elements. So to your point, signage in the outfield, we don't have an awareness issue,
No,
right?
I don't think so.
Um, so what I really am starting to think about is instead kind of that intersection of sports and business, particularly on the female side. So, like the sports bra down in Portland, Jenny and her amazing story of going from one location into now building a franchise. For me, I was like, that's actually the sort of conversation I want to be a part of. We get to meet you in that intersection. We can still talk about sports and female empowerment and these amazing things happening in the female sports ecosystem. But then we get this really unique small business entrepreneurial lens on it as well. And we get to be a part of that story. So that's the way I'm starting to kind of curate it and craft it, if you will. I'm looking for those opportunities where it's not signage on the suite level. It's, sitting down with the Kraken and talking about Jessica, the first female coach in the NHL. I want to know her story.
It's a fascinating intersection, right? Because fandom takes place on a bunch of different levels.
Of course.
You have to take into account too the amount of what's the amount of business being done at a sports stadium on an average week, right? I mean, club seats, hospitality suites, premium zones, all the kind of activity that is happening on LinkedIn is also happening outside of LinkedIn in sports is one of those sort of catalysts associated with it. So I completely get and kind of feel myself getting excited about it. This sort of opportunity for you, it's not so much awareness, right? Like you said, who the hell hasn't heard of LinkedIn? But how do you start activating LinkedIn in a manner with that sports? How do you engage people? How do you connect LinkedIn to those moments? I feel like that's a now see, look at how I want to help start building it. I mean,
Ramani?
it's pretty fertile ground, right?
It is really, yeah, it's a new perspective for me, but, um, One that is actually I'm coming into a lot of the conversations with that point of view, like sitting down with different teams that wanna give me, like, the full, like, off the shelf, these are all the things you can do in
We've
the
had
opening.
this conversation before.
Yes, we had this conversation before, and you kind of stop them and say, like, "Tell me about your front office staff," or "Tell
Yeah.
me about your female CEO or your new, head of game ops. I wanna hear about her story instead." And it makes them kind of stop and be like, "Oh, you're right. We're
Yeah.
empowering a bunch of incredibly smart women, former athletes themselves who have now made their way back into the business side of sport." And so it's been kind of a fun exploration because it's not conversations I'd had in the past. It's very much what are the elements, what are the impressions, what's the ROI? And I get to take a step back from that and really say, like, what's the story behind it?
Oh man, you just hit the nail right on the head. Think of the storytelling that you can do associated
Fun,
with this.
but
The
I
other thing that's really kind of fun too is, you probably we talked just mentioned like fertile ground. 5, 10 years ago, if you said, "Oh, there's a fertile ground of women's sports," you really would be talking about one league, maybe two.
Right.
Women's sports now, I mean, you have the challenge of vetting, God, which leagues, which teams, which athletes, which college athletes, which college teams. This is a big universe. So, how do you begin?
Again, I'm trying to ground myself in the business of that growth mindset. How are we creating additional knowledge on platform around the business of sport? How are we empowering women? And start there.
Yeah.
So, for example, I had a great conversation with the gals at Parity a few weeks ago, and we were having this long discussion because it's if you know them, they represent professional female athletes of every scale, WNBA athletes to professional kayakers.
Hmm.
And
There are professional kayakers?
or
Yeah.
bicyclists, rugby
Okay. All
players,
right. All right. Take your word.
what
Maybe
have you.
I take your word for
That's exactly.
it.
And what was really fun is that the conversation started very off the shelf, and we started to talk more about how professional rugby players, unfortunately, aren't making enough to make ends meet. So, what's that like? How can LinkedIn come in and offer additional resources? Maybe I've got 12 hours a week, I can pick up contract work, or are there companies specifically looking for part-time employees with my background skill? And it turned in this whole like, oh my gosh, could we create a collection of jobs that's specific to female athletes and the additional time they have? And so it started as a partnership, but then becomes like a resource for the greater power and the greater good that's being developed and built before our eyes. So that part just, you walk away from that conversation on cloud nine because you're like, get to be a part of the growth, I guess,
I
and so
think
that
I'm
part of
starting to see what the appeal of moving from Zappos to LinkedIn was.
right? Like, it's a different level of conversation,
Yeah.
and I think the part that's most exciting, and it's not being talked about very much, especially in our space. So, I feel very fortunate that I did be part of those conversations.
If only there was a podcast that could support your efforts to do this kind of outreach, am I right?
I know, I wish I knew somebody.
Megan Sheffield, always a pleasure. And I literally like coming out of my shoes, looking forward to seeing what's going to happen at LinkedIn with you.
I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.